And so we're talking about newspaper advertising, and we're looking at various categories. And remember, we were looking at your distribution. We were talking about a local paper, and we were going to consider factors like distribution versus subscription versus the radius of draw from your office versus where it goes, where the paper actually goes versus the radius of draw. The cost for a flyer, whether it's to print the flyer, one side, both sides, and insert it. And then we're going to, the cost per column inch, we're going to look at that. And then the cost per column inch, and then the cost for the classified ads. So these were some of the factors that we were going to evaluate and just kind of talk about what the possible potential is. So let's just go ahead and start with who wants to volunteer with that information that they got.
I got some information.
Okay, let's go with Stacy. Let's go with whatever you got. Like with whatever you got, let's just with what you got. Let's just evaluate with what you do have. So let's start with the paper. Do you have a local paper?
Yes, it's local to the Northeast area. It's not just local to my specific city. So
Okay.
Several cities involved.
Okay, so it's out. It definitely covers more than your geographic radius of draw, right?
Yes.
How much more? So your radius of draw is probably 2 miles, no more than 3 miles in a suburb in outside the Dallas, Texas area. So how far out does it go?
Pretty far. I mean, it's all of the Northeast Tarrant County area.
And when you say pretty far, you like how many zip codes relative to your zip code?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I do know, I don't know if this matters, but there's 70,000 in distribution. It's not a paid paper. So it's free for everyone. It's delivered at the areas of people that advertise. But I think, I don't know how long ago Chad talked to you about this specific thing, and that's why we actually went with this. We get 12 ads.
Well, before you do that, let's go into some of these specifics. When does it come out?
Once a month, usually about the second week of each month.
It only comes out once a month?
Yeah.
Is that a newspaper or a magazine?
It's not a magazine. It's a newspaper, but it is small.
So it's
the Northeast Tarrant Times.
Okay, so we got a 70,000 distribution. It's free. Comes out once a month. So I'm still trying to figure out this radius of draw, because remember, I'm going to look at a map, and I'm going to look at my office, and I'm going to do a radius of draw and my psychographic barriers. Everybody knows how to do that now. You should know your radius of draw and your psychographic barriers. We covered how to do that. So you know your parameters. You know your marketing parameters. Now, where does that fall outside of it? So I'm just going to match up where it falls. And most likely they're going to give you, when you go to geographic radius of draw, they'll give you zip codes. They'll say, well, we're in this zip code, this zip code, this code. Or they'll give you roads or county lines. We go as far as this county line or this road. So do you have any kind of boundaries you can give me besides? So we don't know the percentage of people it goes to in your radius of draw relative to the whole distribution, do we?
I could probably get that specific information, but I don't have it.
Could you guess?
I can ask Chad. He might know.
Okay, so you couldn't guess?
No.
Okay. What's the population in your zip code?
I don't even know that. Because we cover a few different codes.
Okay, you have to know, obviously you have to know your zip code. And, if you have other zip codes that are in your geographic radius of draw, you got to know those. All right, this is basic marketing, right?
It's about 33,000.
Okay, I'm just saying it. This is like basic marketing 101. These are things that we need to know. Okay, so if you got 30,000, now it's got a distribution. Now, when we say distribution of 70,000, here is a very important word. It's 70,000 households, not people, right?
Right.
Now, why is that important? Here's why it's important. The average household has 2.5 people. So you take that number and you multiply it times 2.5. So times 2 would be 140 times half of 70 is 35. So 140, 175, say 180,000 roughly. So you're reaching 180,000 people. Now, if you're in a radius of 30,000, so it's less than 30, 15. We're less than 20%. We're probably at 15%. We'd be at 15, and 15 is 15, 30. So at 15%. So we're at 15, 7. We're about 17% of the distribution. You got 30,000 population because your 30,000 represents people, not households. So you're only representing about 15% of that number, right? Are you guys all hearing this? Are you with me on this? Does this make sense? So we have a distribution of 70. That's households. You multiply that times 2.5. So you're at about 180. I'm just rounding these numbers. So you're at about 180. 2 times 7 is 140. Half of 70 is 35. 140 and 35 is 175. So you got 175 people, and your zip code. Now, do you remember if your geographic radius of draw is more than your zip code? Do you remember if that was on the map or not?
Yes, it is. The paper goes out 10 miles past our radius with the 70,000 acres.
Okay. So you have more than one zip code inside your radius of draw?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is why it's so important to visually see a map right now and to look at our radius of draw and the zip codes and then to plot out, then know the geographic radius of draw of this paper. I mean, I got to know this. So right now... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I didn't have enough information to give you.
Let's go. I mean, that's what this is about. This is about, learning, the basics of all this. So we're just trying to, all I'm doing is doing a flow chart, just kind of walking through with you the thinking process of how it all works. So if I'm at 170,000 people and but you don't know your population of radius of draw, right? We know your zip code is 30,000.
About 120,000 people.
In your radius of draw?
Yeah, because the first unit Bedford City has about 30,000, and then there's also some part of North Richland Hill.
Your radius of draw is not more than 3 miles. You're telling me you got over 100,000 people in 3 mile radius?
Okay, I'm missing what you're asking.
The question was your radius of draw. Remember, that's where we find out where the high probability of where people come from, not only how far out, but what direction. That's called psychographics. And that tells us distances for marketing. So you said you're in one zip code. So you see how without visually seeing this, I hope you guys can see that we need to see this. So what we should see is the map. We should see your office. We should see your radius of draw and your boundaries, your psychographic boundaries. And then we should know the boundaries for our marketing. In this case, we're talking about newspaper. So then I'm going to put my northern boundary, my southern boundary, my east and west. And then I have to look at what percentage of that newspaper. And my big question now is, say we're only 20% of the distribution. My big question is, can I control that? Can I limit what I do to define? Because I already know if I do advertising outside of my radius of draw, what happens to that, the value of that advertising? It's wasted. You're wasting your money. So I'm going to do everything I can to know my radius of draw, know where it goes, and then go, well, how can we work with the paper for distribution? Because wouldn't I rather, if I only go to 30,000 people in my rate. Wouldn't I rather just pay for 30,000 instead of 170? If 140,000 are not in my radius of draw, can you see how I'm wasting all that money? Can you see that, Stacy?
Yes, yes,
Does that make sense?
yes, yes.
Okay, so we need to know, we should know your boundaries. Now we need to know the newspaper's boundaries. Then we need to know, do they have a method of delivery where it only goes to my radius of draw? Now, if it's an insert, you have a much greater likelihood of you controlling it going to your area. In other words, that it doesn't go to 170,000 people where 80% of it is outside of your radius of draw. If it's an insert, you can control those things with inserts and newspapers. If it's a in-print ad, in other words, if it's a print ad or in a classified section, something like that, chances are you will not be able to control that at all. In other words, you're going to waste 70% of that the money on going to areas that you're not even going to attract them from. Now, we don't know that answer, but I'm just kind of walking you through some of the psychology of how to think about it. So that's the number one thing I want to know right now is, what is the true overlap, your radius of draw relative to where it goes? Number one. Number two, does the paper have a way of segmenting it? And they do, by the way, they do. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can tell them typically boundaries, or you can tell them zip codes. And a lot of times papers will even have zones. They'll sometimes even break up geographic areas into their delivery zones that aren't necessarily zip code based or county line based. So you got to find out, how do they break up? How can they break up? In other words, how can they segment distribution? Now, they can almost always segment it with boundaries, if you gave them boundaries, or zip codes. That's direct mail. That's a common issue. You can easily do that. So that's the two things that you need. So write that down if you would and get that information. Now let's move forward with some of this other stuff. And so I say it says free. I'm not liking that. There's not as much commitment in free as there is, and usually there's a lot more ads than there are actually news. I'm not liking that it's free at all, and I'm not liking that it's once a month, that kind of frequency. Let's go to another topic. What's the cost? Do you know the cost per column square inch, Stacy?
I could probably figure that out.
Okay.
The deal that we got.
Well, no. Let me ask specific questions, because this is the information. We need to start asking our questions, not just them giving us generic stuff that we don't understand, and then that's non-transferable. We can't play that game. So we need to know the cost per square inch. So if you could write that down also. And then, did you get any cost for printing 8.5 by 11 flyers?
I didn't get that. We
Okay,
just got the cost for a year for 12 ads, and one of them full page, and the rest of them were about 4 by 5.
A 4 by what?
4 by 5.
Okay.
Around. And one full page. So 11 4 by 5, one full page. Comes out once a month, and it's $2,500 a year.
Okay, so we don't have our column per square inch. We don't know our classified cost either, then, do we?
I don't know if they have to regular classified.
You don't know the cost for the classified ad?
No.
Okay, I need you to get that also. Now, if you're going to open an office, is this not basic information that you're going to have to talk with your associate or the other office you're opening?
Yeah.
And when you open another office, what's that going to do to your life? When you train somebody and you open an office and they're successful, what's that going to do to your life?
Free my time.
It's going to create freedom and wealth for you. So is this worth learning?
Yes.
Well, even if you didn't do it for somebody else, don't you think you might need to know it for your business? If you didn't even do it for anybody, don't you need to know these kind of specifics for your business?
I do need to know that.
Yeah, this is basic business. This is just basic business is what this is. So we need to know them anyway, but you certainly, when you have an associate or, you talk to him about newspaper, or you talk to them, maybe you're going to open them up. You got to know, the rough outline of how this works and what topics and what do they mean and what information should they get. So anyway, having said that, cost per square inch, classified. So since we don't have a lot of information here, we're missing a lot of factors. We got some information, but so we don't know how much of that newspaper distribution goes to our geographic radius. We don't know. Let's see. Cost per square column inch. So there's several factors we don't know. Let's go to what we do know and make an assumption with what we do know. So if it's once a month and it was a 4x5, by the way, that's probably 4 columns by 5 inch, Stacy. That's probably what that represents. 4 columns wide by 5 inches high. That's probably what that represents. That's the language of the newspaper. So a 4x5, essentially it's like a quarter page ad, a little less than a quarter page. Is it a regular size newspaper, Stacy?
I think so. It looks pretty close, a little bit smaller.
Okay. So let's say it's a quarter size. Is it about a quarter size ad in the paper or slightly less than a quarter size?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. Did they give you any priority placement if you signed a contract with them?
It was not guaranteed.
Okay. And so we talked about the importance of that. So based on what little information we have, let's make an assessment. Is that something we would do? It's $2,500 once a month. Let's say it's a quarter size ad. We don't know the inserts, the cost of the inserts, the distribution of inserts, the radius of distribution. We don't know the classified ads. So based on what we do know, $2,500 a year, is that something worth doing? So what do you think, Colby?
No, you just don't know if it's getting to your people.
I'm saying based on, let's just make an assessment on what we do know.
No.
Well, what are you going to base it on?
You don't know if it's getting to your distribution area. She said it goes 7 miles past her distribution area. I mean, until you get a little more information, I wouldn't do it.
Well, what's the formula that we base it on? It's frequency, right? Frequency. Remember the formula?
Nope.
Frequency times reach. So frequency is how often it goes.
Okay.
Reach is who it goes to. Okay. Equals the amount of touches, right?
Okay.
Frequency times reach. That's the amount of touches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if frequency is 1, or let's say once a month, 1 frequency, the reach is, say, let's say it's 30,000. Let's say it's 30,000 within our radius of draw. Maybe it's even more, but people who actually will come to us because they're close enough. So let's say it's 30,000 once, and then what's the cost? 2,500. Well, what are we going to base the cost on? Is it high or low? Well, it's going to be based on what your case average is, right, for your target market, and what your probability is. So national advertising is typically a 1% draw, 1%. And good advertising is 3% or more. So if we had a 1% draw, what would that be? What's 1% of 3,000 or 30,000? 10% would be 3,000, right? So 1% would be
30.
Okay, so if we say 1% is 30, is that right? 30, 1%. So there's out of 30,000, if it's 1%, is that right? 30,000, 1%. Let's see, 10% of 30,000 is 3. Third, I think that's right, isn't it? I don't have my public high school math going right now.
Is it not 300?
300.
Yeah, okay, sorry. 300. So if it was 1% out of 30,000, there's 300. We're going, well, that's a pretty good ratio, 300. And then you go, well, what's your case average? If your case average 1,000, 300,000, and you're paying 2,500 for the year, well, 25 divided by 12 is what? 200, right? Roughly. 2,400 is 200 a year. So let's just round it out and say, so essentially you're paying $200 a year, possible 300 at a 1%, 3,000. You see, now we're making a lot of assumptions here because we don't know these numbers, Stacy. But I'm just trying to go through a flow chart here of analyzing the advertising. So if we had a 30,000 market, and it's not even a target market, is it? We're not controlling demographics or psychographics at all, are we? We're trying to control some geographics because we're saying 30,000 in our draw. We're not saying 170,000. I'm not going to include those additional numbers that are outside of my radius and draw. That's just, that's ridiculous to even think about trying to get that. So if it was 30,000 and it's a 1%, the national average is 1%, say 300, a case average. Let's say the case average is 100 and you're paying 200. So would it be okay to pay $200 a month to possibly get 300 units at $1,000? What would the return on investment be for that, right? It'd be pretty high, wouldn't it? So let's realistic. Is 300 going to come in? No. So let's go to some real numbers here. Out of 10,000, you might get anywhere from 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 3. So if you did 30,000, depending on the ad, you might pull anywhere from 2 to 10, right? Maybe 2 to 10, depending on the ad and things of that nature. Now, I don't like its frequency once a month. I don't like that at all. Matter of fact, I'm going to do some other things with advertising to really boost that. I'm really going to go to a newsletter even more so than an ad, just because it's once a month. Because I don't want that paper being thrown away. A newsletter will stick around. When I say an insert will stick around a lot longer than that newspaper. So then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have got to capture these people for follow-up because the frequency is it's so infrequent. Once a month is just not a good frequency. So I'm going to try to beef up my contact by my style of marketing. Newspaper inserts hang around longer. Newsletter inserts hang around longer. Giving them an offer to capture their contact information so we can follow up with them even after the paper's been thrown away. Does this make sense? You guys understand this language?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the thought process. So I'm going to try to incorporate a higher style for frequency because that once a month is really bad. Worst thing I would do is put an ad in there, and that's it. It'd be gone afterwards, where I'm not directing them and capturing their information. That's the worst thing you could do here. I'm not controlling demographics or psychographics. I'm trying to restrict geographics. So I'm going to work with the ad a little more. So if it's anywhere from 2 to 5 to 7 people, possibly, and you have a 50% referral rate. So let's say you only got 3 and you got a 50% referral rate. So you get another 1.2. So you got another maybe 4. Your case average is 4,000. You pay $200 for the month. Is that worthwhile? Is it worth paying $2,000 to make $4,000? $200 to make $4,000? That'd be a good investment, wouldn't it? Okay. Now, if you didn't have retention, you'd be in trouble, right? If you got 3 new patients and it stayed for 6 visits or 2 visits, you'd be in trouble, wouldn't you? And if you didn't know how to get any referrals off of them, you'd be in trouble. So if you didn't know how retention or how to get new patients from the circle of influence, real quickly, you'd be in trouble. This would be a bad investment. But if you knew how to keep them after you got them, retention, and you know how to get 1 or 2 referrals like we teach, now it becomes a very good investment. So you're paying $200 for roughly $4,000 in return. So yeah, but like I said, I'm going to try to use some form of media where I can contact them more than once a month. That frequency. And I know I got a freebie. What do people pay attention to with freebies? Out of the 5 reasons why people act, trust, price, quality, service, or proximity. If it's a free newspaper, overwhelmingly, what's the number one thing they're going to be looking for in that paper? What kind of ad?
Right.
Price. Yeah, it's a freebie, so it's a price-based medium. So, you know, now I'm decreasing my quality also, right? So I got free, lower quality. I'm gonna want to deal with price because it's a price-based medium. That's going to be the incentive is going to be price-based because that's why they're looking at it, because that's what it's based on. So it would be a big price-based delivery. It would be something that sticks around longer, like an insert, newsletter insert, or a capture, squeeze page capture for follow-up. But am I going to be willing to do that even though I have limited information? Would I probably go ahead and spend $200 a month to possibly get anywhere from 1 to say 7, 1 to 4 new patients that I know how to keep for 20 plus visits at a referral rate of 50% or greater? Is that something that are those good numbers? Yes, those are good numbers. And in reality, 1 personal injury patient, right? 1 personal injury patient would cover it 100%, right? 1. So yeah, and it's a local paper. So I would definitely do it even with the little information I know now. But I'm definitely tweaking some things. Like I said, Stacy, I'm still going to want to know this other information I talked about. I said get that information. The main thing is the radius of draw relative to my geographics. That's the number one thing that I want to know. By the way, Stacy, how is it polling for you? Every month, are you keeping stats with the newspaper? How many it's polling, that ad?
The first month we had like 3 people call and 1 person come in through Medicare, so it wasn't a good experience.
Okay.
Because he had actually been a patient at that point before with previous owner. And the second month, I think we had 2 phone calls, 1 scheduled.
Okay. And you guys know with free, you get lower quality people. You guys know that. You got to be better, right? You even have to be better when it comes to cold calls, and it's price-based. You know that. I hope you know that. So you got to be at the top of your game, you know, when you're dealing with a price-based medium that's free and discounted. You got to be really good on the phone to get them in. When you get them in, you got to be really good at stair-stepping them. You know, you got to be really good because they're not introduction, you know, high-trust categories, and they're cost-conscious. So, yeah. So would it be worth doing? Yeah, but I would be trying to do a lot more capture. You know, do me a favor, State. Can you send me the ad so I can look at it, and maybe we can critique the ad next time.
Yeah, just mail it to you or copy it.
Just if you can scan it, digitize it, just put it in a scanner. You know, digitize it and just send me a digital copy.
Of my specific ad, not the paper.
Yeah, just your ad, so we can evaluate the quality of the ad and the components of the ad. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. I think that'll help as we do this with each of you. I think it'll really, this will all start to flow together, and you'll start to see how you can start tweaking everything to make it more effective and better and less expensive and all that stuff. So if you could get that basic information, Stacy, bring it back, and let's follow up with that next time we meet, so we have some congruency here, and go from there.
Okay.
So is there one other person that we have time for? with the newspaper? Does anybody else have any newspaper statistics? Okay, Chris, let's do. Okay, Chris, Melaine, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to actually get in here tonight too, because we have a local paper here that has been subscription based, and starting at the end of July, July 31st, they're going to go to a free model with subscriptions. And they offer me a big discount if I get in before it goes to that model. So next Monday is their deadline if I sign for a year contract for a lot of discount they offer. So,
all right, let's go through the flow chart. Let's go through our flow chart. What's the distribution?
10,000 papers. 10,000 papers. Once a week.
Okay, and I take it that's households, right?
Households, yes. Households, yes.
Okay, so 2 times 5 would be 20, roughly 25,000 people. And that's distribution or that's distribution, right?
Distribution.
Okay, and you remember distribution's always weaker than subscription. And it's free, right?
It's free, but they are going to have some subscribers. She couldn't give me hard numbers on that because they're still making the phone calls and trying to figure out who's going to stay on.
Let's go with what we got. So we got roughly 25,000 distribution free. And where does it go relative to your radius of draw?
It goes to 2 zip codes. My radius of draw is about 9,000 or so.
So what percentage? So would you say 9,000 of the 25,000?
Yes.
Okay. So say 20%, 2.5, 5, 10. So about, what is that? That's about 20%, right? 10% is 2.5. So 10% is 2.5. Actually, that's 40%, right?
Yeah, probably close to that.
Okay. So you could get up to 40%. And then same thing, can you see how important it is to understand segmentation? So will you be able to limit and restrict where it goes to, or is 60% of that ad wasted going to geographic areas that's not in your area? So once again, you probably have the ability to control it with inserts. You probably do not have the ability to control it with print, if it's like a classified ad or it's print. But you need to find that out. So we got 9,000. And what's the cost?
$7.34. But if I sign up for a year contract, it goes down to. But if I sign up for a year contract, it goes down to
$7.34 for what?
Per column inch.
So you said it was $7.34. So if it was 4 columns, 4 times 7 would be 28. If it's 5 columns high, 5 inches high, it'd be 5 times 7 is 35. 28 and 35 is 63. So it'd be $63 roughly for an ad. Did you find out what the cost for an insert would be? Print or delivery?
$3.50. Yeah, before we move on though, I could get $3.50 per column inch if I sign for a year contract.
Okay, so basically half of that. So it'd be roughly $35, just say roughly.
Okay.
For the same, 4 by 7, 4 by 5. Okay, let's just evaluate that. And you say out of 25,000, so 35, 350.
Once a week on Wednesday.
How often does it come out?
Once a week on Wednesday.
Okay, that's good. So if it was once a week, we're at 30%. That's 140 a month now. If it was once a week. Okay, so 1,400 for 1,000, 4, 5, 6, 7. So about $1,700 roughly for the year. 140 a month, 1,700 for the year, and you're at 9,000 people. So is it worth the math? So we say 9,000 people. You get 1%. Again, if you get 2 patients out of that and your case average is 1,000, that's, $2,000. So you spend 140 to make 2. And again, if you're at a 50% referral rate, if you got 2, you get another one, so that's 3. So $3,000, and you spend $140 to get $3,000. So the return on investment would be pretty big, right? You take your cost minus your return divided by your return. So we have a pretty big return on investment, and you're at $1,700 for the year. So one personal injury patient would easily give you over 100% return, right?
Right.
And, one new patient with a 50% referral. So you see how the numbers are pretty good. The ratios are pretty good, but they're only pretty good if what? They're only pretty good if you know retention. If you don't know retention and you're losing the patients after 3 or 4 visits or the first visit, then none of this is worth doing. And if you don't know how to get referrals, then none of it is worth doing. You'll lose money. But you'll make a big return if your retention is 20 or greater and you got a 50% referral rate. You see how important your skill level is in interpreting this? I see this all the time. Doctors that advertise, they'll do 10%. They'll get maybe 2, 3, 4 new patients, but they don't know practice management. They'll lose the business, and maybe it costs $600 to run that, and they won't even make their $600 back. But if you got the same 3 new patients at a 50% referral rate at a 20+ retention, you'd make $5,000. So you'd spend $600 to make $5,000. See, I'd do that over and over and over again as many times as I could. That's the difference between your knowledge and your skill level. It's a huge difference. So would I spend $1,700 for a potential of $9,000 once a week? It's a free paper, so we know that's not good. But it's once a week. That's good. That's better. So, yeah, would I do that? Yes, I would definitely do that. Now, do I still want all this other information? Yeah, I want all this, what's the inserts cost, the flyers, what's the distribution, can I segment it more and all that? Then I'd still try to do the same thing, though. I'd still consider what these other factors are with inserts and flyers, because remember, an insert and flyer will stick around longer than a newspaper. A newspaper has a shelf life of 1 day. It's
I have that information for the
real
inserts.
fast.
I have that information for the inserts.
Okay, and if I do a newspaper ad only, then I want to capture them. I want to do everything I can to just send them somewhere for something so I can continue the conversation instead of a one-off. So I'm going to pay a lot of attention to that. So what do you have for the information for inserts?
Per insert, and that'll go into each one of their
$250
papers. That'll go to
per
10,000
insert,
papers.
and that'll go into each one of their papers. That'll go to 10,000 papers.
No, I'd have to print
Is
it
that
myself.
printing and distribution?
No, I'd have to print it myself.
Okay.
They said
Well,
that
they
they're
will
printing,
print it for you, won't
they said they did not
They
recommend
said
it.
that they're printing. They said
get
they
it
did
in
not
there.
recommend it. It would be really difficult to get it in there.
That's unusual.
So they recommend.
Okay, some doesn't sound right like that, because most newspapers are also printers.
Okay,
They
I'll
print
follow
for
up and
direct
ask them
mail also. I
again,
don't
but
know
they
if you know
said
that.
they didn't
Okay,
recommend
I'll
that.
follow up and ask them again, but they said they didn't recommend that.
Okay, some doesn't sound right there. Usually,
Okay.
the least expensive printing you can have most often is from the newspaper. Because that's what they do. They just high volume printing. I mean, that's what they do. So, some doesn't sound right with that.
Okay.
Sounds like there's some miscommunication somewhere.
Okay.
So find that out and get real specific. Do they print? Now, I asked for the basics with print. Black print, no color, 8.5 by 11 sheet, black print, one side. Really basic. Okay?
Okay.
So get that information. And then also go to a print company, since they gave you that information, and see what they would cost per 1,000 for printing up an 8.5 by 11 flyer to be inserted into the newspaper. Because I've done that before too, where I've had it printed and then I had it shipped to the newspaper for distribution, insert and distribution.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So, 250, you said $250, right, for distribution?
Correct.
Okay. And typically, years ago it was $40 to $50 for printing. Let's say if it's 50 per 1,000, 10,000, that's 500. So you're $750. you're at $750 for a flyer at $50 per thousand, 10,000, and $250 for distribution. Say now we got to start, if you're talking about $700, you can't spend $750 a month, for a lot of months without getting some kind of feedback, right?
Right.
So, that's a much more sensitive area. I need to know these numbers. But if I drop down and go to the $140 a month for once a week, for a 4x5 ad, just, with some of the math we did, I'm going, I'm definitely, that's looking very, I'm going to get my money back on that. In other words, what's the likelihood of you being in there for 52 weeks once a year and not getting
That's
one
not
new
likely
patient?
to not get
What's
at least
that
one or
likelihood?
two. That's not likely to not get at least one or two.
Right. And one new patient will easily give you
Right.
100% return on investment, right?
Right.
So there you go. So that is more of a slam dunk. I need more information for the inserts, and newsletters and all, and printing,
Okay.
Okay. But
Okay.
same thing. After I do it, it's going to be price based because that's where you're at. I'm not going to have high quality, and I definitely want follow up. I'd rather get. You guys, the statistics with follow up. If 10, I'll just give you a rough number. If 10 people go to an ad, only 30 or 40% of them will actually give you their information, like their name and email, to get something free, so you can follow up with them. The more that you ask, once you go past a name and an email, if you go to a phone number and then you go for an address, the more information you ask, the number of people significantly decreases. The more you ask, the more it significantly decreases. But here's what happens. And there's a big jump when you start asking for a phone number or an address. There's a big jump in the amount of people who will not give it to you. But only about 30 to 40% of the people that come to your ad and says, hey, give me your name and email and I'll give you this, only about 30 to 40% of the people will do that. But of the 30 or 40% of the people that do that, it easily overwhelms the number of people that'll buy from that 30 or 40%, easily overcomes, if you don't ask and you just give it to them for free, the percentage of those people that will buy with no follow-up. The follow-up significantly, remember what I told you with follow-up, it increases 50% with 3 contacts. So it's much, much more important to have less people sign up, but you be able to follow up. That's way more important. Now, Stacy, probably the ad you're running, it's probably a one-off and there's no capture and there's no follow-up.
I need to find all that out. I didn't set this up.
I need to find all that out.
I don't
Okay.
know all the information I need
I
to
didn't
know.
set this up,
So, yeah.
and I don't know all the information I need to know.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and this is being recording and I'm gonna send it to you, and you're gonna want Chad to watch this. And he may want to be on when we talk about advertising. Okay, so having said that, that's kind of a quick analysis. But can you see how we still don't have all y'all's information? All the information I asked for, we still don't have. The information we needed was, number 1, distribution. Number 2, subscription. Okay. The number of days of distribution, how often it goes out. What is the cost per column square inch? What is the cost for the number of lines and words in a classified ad? What is the cost for printing an 8.5 by 11? What is the cost for distribution or 8.5 by 11? What is the geographic radius of draw? And can they segment it? And how do they segment? Do they have their own zones? Do they segment it by county roads, boundaries, counties, etc., zip codes? How do they segment? When it comes to inserts, they can and will segment. It's when it's actually a part of the papers, when it's much, much more difficult. Usually only real large papers can do that. So we talked about the cost per column square inch often, and cost. So those are the key factors that we want to look at to evaluate. And then all we do is we look at the frequency, the reach. That is going to determine the number of touches. We're looking at the potential cost versus the potential return. What's the potential? We're going to reverse that out, base it on a 1% return rate. Then we're going to compare that to. So is it important we know a 1% return is average? Is it important we know what your case average is? Is it important we know your dollar per visit or your patient retention? Is that all important in evaluating whether you're going to do any type of marketing? Yeah, because some of you that don't have good retention or any very good referrals, maybe some of this marketing wouldn't be worth it at all. But some of you that have good retention and good proactive referral skills, you'll get tremendous return on investment just because of that knowledge and skill set.